I So I'll just speak to the amendment. So this is an amendment by replacement, trying to get everyone's views in through this. If this was a vote, if we had the right, which we probably should have, the right to change our plan by a vote, I would be voting to ban helicopters in residential zones. To me, I've never been on a helicopter. I don't understand why or how people want or need helicopters going to their residential properties. I do not. I think we were all extremely surprised, and I know it's an appeal, so I won't go into the details, about the decision. Probably if it was a decision that was approved through the non-complying route, we would probably not really be having this conversation, but I know that the council, because our position and also the views of the unitary plan and how it's applied, everyone was shocked that essentially we now have on the table helicopter activity as a permitted status, which we all know is the most ridiculous thing you could ever expect. It is not something that we would expect in our plans to be a permitted activity. What I'm trying to do, because I must have had 15 meetings on this just in the last little while, but over the whole period of this discussion, I voted in favour, Councillor Lee, of your bringing forward in 2023 the ability to investigate a prohibited status. I was very supportive of that, but all the advice came back to us was we would spend upwards of $1 to $2 million and spend 2 years for an almost guaranteed decline by independent commissioners. If it was our decision, you would definitely have a majority of us backing it and it would be over. But now we also have the really, really messed up, and I disagree with the government's changes. If they had said, we will not force you to do plan changes anymore, I would have accepted that. What they've done is said, we will decide what plan changes you do, which I think is completely anti-democratic and it makes no sense to me. But what I'm trying to do here is give us a chance. You can bet, and the way that I've heard the triage process may or may not work, well, we have to go and beg to the minister to put through a plan change. If we said, here is our plan change on prohibiting something across all residential sites across Auckland, and we don't have staff backing, and we do not think we have experts, there is almost guaranteed no way the minister will say yes to that. What this does is give us a little spark or a light, because I've added in there that we'll ensure that we have non-complying, that's explicit, but also the ability to put prohibited activity status in sensitive areas. And that would help what Councillor Darby's saying, where there's environmental outcomes needed. It'll help in very tight residential sites, which we have seen applications come to. It will give the staff the ability to come back to us and hopefully put prohibited status on residential properties where it makes sense across the city. But if we do blanket, we know quality planning, every bit of evidence and everything I've looked at in New Zealand law and Auckland it's actually the first time I've spoken all day, Councillor Walker. But the thing is, I don't think we would get past the first gate, which is the minister, and then we have to somehow prove that we have experts that will back us up. The other issue is, if we don't hit this, and this is why I asked the staff what we could do on the current consent once I realised we couldn't appeal it, and I know that I met with Quiet Skies and others to try and address that, and I'm glad there's an appeal in process and time. It gives us time. But this Environment Court determination would also mean that we will not have a gold rush of permitted helicopter activity applications, which may or may not happen. Not many people have a helicopter, but we do have an issue. That needs to be put in law right now or as soon as possible to make sure that we don't have this gold rush of permitted activities. I think that is extremely concerning if we have have those sorts of applications coming in. My issue is, though, if that determination does not come in our favour, we will have the election period, we will have a new council, we will have people being having to be sworn in. All during that period, we only have the backstop of the prohibited activity thing going through. Then we have potentially 2 years of permitted helicopter activity applications coming through. And then, because we've been told it's almost certainly going to be declined, we'll have another 2 years. If we, in my opinion, voted for the NOM as it was written, we could have a 4-year period of permitted helicopter activity. And on my conscience, even though I support exactly what you're saying, Councillor Lee, I could not, in my conscience, lock up a 4-year process that could allow helicopter activity, permitted activity for that long. So what this will do is it will ensure that we get the fastest, quickest action possible on the current consent. It'll also give us certainty whether it's non-complying on the, which we thought it was, on the unit on the Auckland mainland. And then if we get an outcome that is not in our favour, the work will be done on a non-complying plan change that has parts that the staff think, and the staff have said there are plenty of parts of Auckland that they believe could be prohibited, not the whole of. And that work will continue during the election campaign, during the time between any elected members being sworn in, and even if there doesn't get to be a report back to a committee, whatever the committees are, whoever the councillors are in that time. All that work continues at the fastest pace possible to ensure we do not have a future where we have a couple hundred permitted helicopter activity applications coming in at the same time. So this is not anything against anyone around this table. This was only, and staff can vouch, created during this meeting with many of my questions coming through this morning. I just want the best possible outcome that doesn't waste money and doesn't waste time in an outcome that will, I think, could lead us to 4 years of permitted helicopter activities. So right now we can go to questions of me or the staff on this, and then we can go back into the debate. Thanks. Councillor Fletcher first. Sorry.
Oh, thank you. Accepting what you have just explained to us in good faith, my query to you, by way of questions, is why have A and B, and why would you not, if it is seeking an urgent determination, why not direct staff to seek an urgent determination? I just don't see the benefit of A and B, and I think you could make it much firmer in terms of the direction reflecting the mood of the meeting. Why did you express it in this way?
My personal situation of adding those A and B is I know there's been a lot of screenshots of recommendations and resolutions that people believe are factual or that we have the decision-making power to approve. The reason why I put it in there is to help the public understand, because every time I've had conversations with people, they understand the predicament we are in. But if they are just seeing one Facebook post or just one email or just one, but I understand what you're saying, Councillor Fletcher, but my issue was to try and let the public know that, one, we have the challenge of going through the government, which is extremely strange, in my opinion. B, we also have the issue that the independent advice, not the staff advice was this direction anyway, but then when we got independent advice, they also said they cannot see a way through a broad blanket prohibited. So I'm trying to give the context, because I think most people out there, including myself, would assume that as an elected member we can just tomorrow ban helipad activity. So that's why I put it in there. But I'm happy to definitely change C to direct. I'm sure, Megan, is that okay to say direct instead of request?
And
Staff?
Urgent, because there needs to be a sense of urgency to this. I would just ask that you reflect on whether or not, the purpose of this is not just for public relations. The purpose of this is actually to direct staff in a governance sense. what we are doing today is to give staff a sense of direction on what we want to achieve. So my advice to you would be to delete A and B and strengthen C.
I'm not that keen to delete A and B just because it gives people an understanding of why this is the most difficult process we get stuck in, even before the government got involved. But I'm definitely keen there's direct and urgent determination, if that helps. Questions, Councillor Wayne Walker and then Councillor Lee.
Also, I agree with the questions that Councillor Fletcher has just raised, and I'd suggest by way of question that the statement difficult or impossible goes some way to weakening our case. But in respect of C and D, I'm confused. Or I would suggest the wording here is confusing. So it states a declaration from the Environment Court on the activity status of private helipads. What does that mean? What is the activity status, and what are you suggesting in terms of prohibited or non-complying? Because as it reads, it's not a directive, frankly.
I'll get Phil Reid to answer that. He has mentioned it a number of times through today, but if you would explain the direction.
Through the chair,
declaration.
the declaration would have an affidavit or expert evidence that would come forward from a policy planner within council, and it would put forward the interpretation that it is a non-complying activity status on the basis that helicopter landing pads are not an inherent aspect of residential use of land, and therefore, against the activity table, it should be considered as a non-complying activity. So the declaration process is used to make a judgment on how a provision is interpreted, and the evidence that would come forward from staff would put forward that it is a non-complying activity. There could well be evidence from others that seek alternatives.
So I understand the declaration, but the declaration doesn't state what you just said in terms of non-complying. It just says activity status. So it doesn't really tell me anything. So I just put that, Mr. Chair. And then the other issue that I've got is D, which also doesn't make sense. It describes targeted use of prohibited activity status in sensitive areas such as coastal properties, but then takeoffs and landings in residential zones are non-complying. Now, the last thing you want is helicopters flying over residential areas in the inner city and the like. Arguably, they're more sensitive than the coastal areas. So the wording here just doesn't stack up as far as I'm concerned, and again, weakens our case. Now, if I'm mistaken, and I'd ask this by way of question, perhaps the officers can inform me, because that is my take on it. So I find much of this quite confusing and not assisting our cause whatever.
If it was a question to me, the
That is a question to you. Then.
D would ensure that we have what we thought we had, which is non-complying across all residential areas, but would allow staff to prepare a plan change that would enable areas such as coastal properties or such as whatever in a sensitive area could be prohibited. It would mean that we have what we have now, but strengthened, rather than trying to put prohibited across every residential site in Auckland. What also precludes helicopters flying into the middle of a suburb is the civil aviation laws that don't already allow overflying anyway.
Well, through you, that may be your interpretation, but I think it's confusing and not helpful.
Councillor Lee. Question.
Are we still questioning? Is this still question time? Do I have a chance to speak to the notice of motion, to have a right of reply at any stage, or is this manoeuvre meant to obviate that? Because
No,
we have the planners sitting here for hours now, fielding questions, and we're having debate via questioning. So is this going to continue on? Because I would actually like to speak to this ambush motion at the appropriate time, but I don't want to ask questions of the officers because, frankly, their minds are made up, and I can talk about exactly how later on in the meeting.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Lee. I'll have one more question from Councillor Williamson, and then you'll be able to go to your speaking turn. Councillor
Yeah, look, just quickly, I was really uncomfortable with the bottom line of D, and it looks like the strikeout only says such as coastal properties. I thought it should have ended the use prohibited activity status and then finish there, because I don't think it needs in sensitive areas such as and so on. I would have just said we'd just stop nearly the whole last part except where it finishes the sentence at prohibitive activity status. That would make a difference to whether I'd support it or not.
Yeah, I removed such as coastal properties because it was, staff said that narrowed it too much, so there may be far greater
They
areas.
think that we can't add that.
But should we just,
All right, well, that
I'll
changes
just
my
ask for
vote.
advice if we remove insensitive areas, but. Yeah, so staff have said that they would work on a plan change that put prohibited status in areas that.
We don't know yet.
We understand your intention if that's where it goes, and it would obviously always be some kind of target because we still don't think there's blanket ability, so it would have to be targeted. We understand your intention.
Okay, well, I'll now get officers to move back, and then we'll debate the.
Has got merit. Just admitted that.
In certain
Make,
cases.
sorry, speak to the amendment.
Notice of motion.
Councillor Lee, you'd like to speak to the amendment.
Yes,
Stand back.
I presume I'm meant to speak to this red thing, right? It's been moved and seconded? Okay. I'll go through it clause by clause if I can. The information in A is already covered in the notice of motion, which it seeks to replace. However, the notice of motion suggests an approach to the minister, which I'm sure would not be a problem, given the minister is really talking about the 10-year review of plans, not day-by-day plan changes. Otherwise, he'd be answerable to the planning sector, the property sector, planning sector, very similar, for the, was it 106 or 107 plan changes that we've dealt with since the unitary plan, mainly about property developments. So it doesn't add any value. Now we're talking about B. Note the advice from independent experts presented in December 2023. Mr. Reid has actually included the advice from experts, and it's from Styles Group is the experts, and what Styles Group has to say in December 2023, conclusion on prohibited status. Accordingly, we reached a view that it would be difficult or impossible to establish that helicopter landing areas in residential or settlement areas should be prohibited. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this was not the opinion of a retired judge or retired judges or Queen's councillors or King's councillors or even expert planners. It was by John Styles, an acoustics expert, not a planner, not a lawyer, a consultant, a kind of semi-permanent consultant of the council. Now, I'm not going to tell you how much he got paid for this opinion. It sounds like a bench of judges, not an acoustics boffin. I won't tell you how much he got paid for it, but, you know, I looked it up. I looked it up, and this guy, this this guy's on the payroll. So that's the opinions you're basing this amendment on. Not the Court of Appeal, not Justice O'Regan, Justice Glazebrook and Justice Arnold, who set out a number of reasons why prohibited activity is not impossible at all. And I actually read them out earlier in the meeting, quite a long time ago. Now, even though we're meant to be dealing with item 9, we actually jumped ahead to item 11, and that's all been by design, I'm afraid to say. Clearly, this is something of a stitch-up, and in terms of process, the notice of motion, Councillor Leone and my notice of motion was given to staff 2 weeks ago. There was ample time to discuss it. I've had no feedback whatsoever from the staff about it. I did have a meeting with the senior planner over another matter and found out how entrenched the opposition is to making helipads in residential areas a prohibited activity. I have long experience in local and regional government, but I have to say I was more than taken aback by the vehemence of the opposition. So, we're dealing with item 11 when we're meant to be dealing with item 9. We haven't even dealt with the Haureki Golf issue, which is a separate notice of motion. Now, we're meant to support and appeal. This is in light of the disastrous decision by the council-appointed commissioners led by Kit Littlejohn, who is a developer lawyer, who's driven a truck bomb through the Auckland Unitary Plan. Whether his decision is right or wrong, clearly I believe it's wrong. However, he seems to have seized upon a technicality which suggests that our expert planners don't even understand the intricacies of the Auckland Unitary Plan. However, a declaration is to be sought from the Environment Court on the activity status of private helipads in residential areas. Now, in the next, thankfully, the Quiet Sky Waitemata people are going to spend more money to appeal this on behalf of the council, because the council, which got itself into the mess by appointing these people, cannot appeal the decision. Clearly, the planners would prefer that the activity is non-complying in the city. And it seems to me that even though, what's the difference between non-complying and prohibited is essentially, if it's prohibited, the lawyers and the planners have no opportunity, no commercial opportunity, whereas non-complying, the whole circus can go on right up to the Court of Appeal and so on.
I move an extension of time.
Yes. Understanding orders, councillors can only speak to a limited time. That doesn't apply to the officers, but I would like my time extended, please. I'm only up to clause D.
I move an extension of time.
So we've already had 2 minutes additional. Happy for another 2 minutes. We don't need to vote.
So now we're going to go, when we've asked for a plan change in the past, staff have always talked about the cost. It's a significant cost and we're not budgeted and so on. Now we're talking about a plan change, over $1 million it seems, to go back to what we thought was the status quo. The status quo is not acceptable to the community. That's the problem. Otherwise we wouldn't be here today. So, and then we move on to targeted use of prohibited activity. But who's going to be doing the targeted? And if where helipads are enabled right now is already targeted in the airspace which is non-controlled, which is along the coastal fringe. And so now we're going to have targeted use of prohibited activity in sensitive areas such as coastal properties, all extremely vague and not clear at all, and also too much wriggle room in there. What we were asking for is a simple prohibited activity in residential areas where currently civil aviation does allow helipads, helicopter movements. Finally, staff will report back to, I'm just reading this. There's been ample breaks in this meeting today, and this obviously just didn't fall out of the air. And I would have appreciated the courtesy of some consultation. Note that staff will report back to the committee once the Environment Court has made a determination on activity status through the resource consent appeal. Yes, so the people who have presented a petition today, we are relying on them to do the heavy work. The people who have paying huge amounts of rates are going to have to spend their money to go to the Environment Court to actually appeal this rogue resource consent that the council is actually responsible for. And so, Mr. Chair, it would be a lot more simpler to deal with the notice of motion, which is clearer, because what is needed now is clarity for the future. This cannot relate to, it seemed to be implied during the long question and answer session, to the Rawene Avenue consent. It doesn't relate to that. It cannot relate to existing use. It cannot relate to applications and process. It's for the future, to give clarity for the future, which what we have now is utter confusion, and the council itself and its planning staff who appointed these people, who've outsourced the administration of the law onto private persons who are, some of them I believe are conflicted. The council has brought this on itself, and today this outcome by ambush approach with no forewarning whatsoever is not going to help the reputation of the council, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Dalton.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to speak in support of the amendment by replacement. I think it's important in the recommendations that you have stated the context in A and B. Many times I've seen recommendations taken out of context after meetings and councillors being abused because of the context wasn't there. In this case, it is really important. Those 2 points are there for the public to see. I think what we've tried to do here is take a pragmatic approach to try and get the most efficient outcome based on all of the questions that have been asked today and the responses that have been provided by officers. Excuse me. I agree with your opening when you spoke to the amendment, Chair, about trying to achieve exactly what everyone in this room would like to see in a way that will actually achieve it, or as close as possible as we can to it. I don't see anything in this amendment that is opposing the banning of helipads per se. It's really trying to achieve that outcome. I think the questions around non-complying, the wriggle room, we're trying to get past just noise and all of the other effects that come in that can be considered under a non-complying activity. I think that is really critical to it. The seeking the determination from, or declaration from the Environment Court is also important to support any plan change that is going to be written, including the targeted use of prohibited activity is important. As we write that plan change, that will come back. So it's really hard to judge what that plan change is going to look like until it comes back to this table and the councillors that are here at that point can say it's not going far enough. We need it to go further. So there's more opportunity about that. I do get disappointed in the criticism of our officers undermining the integrity of their work and the advice that they're providing with it to us. I think it's really unnecessary. The chair has been working since, as Megan said, since that decision came out, work started on exactly how we would be able, what we could do with the decision that had been made by the commissioners, because it was not the decision that should have been made based on our unitary plan. It was a shock for everybody. And so now we look to how we move forward with it. I'm not confident at all that getting a plan change for prohibition is going to get us where we need to go. What I see in these amendments is activity that can take place, that we can begin and get us moving in the right direction, and not a plan change that could take 2 years and not even hit the mark. That would be really disappointing. That would be Groundhog Day, absolutely. So I support it because of the components in it, that it is trying to take a pragmatic approach, that the intention is to achieve the outcome that the residents of Auckland have asked us for. And we've had emails from all over Auckland. One last night from Papatoetoe, you know. This is important to people. And so we've got to do the very best we can with the tools we have to try and deliver that outcome in the most efficient way. I heard what residents were saying, you know, about the cost and the money, and it's not, I agree, you know. The money, I think the comment was, it shouldn't matter how much it costs, you know, if we're talking about $1 million. The money isn't so much of an issue for me. It is important that we do this. It is important that we fund it. And we do fund it out of existing budgets, that we know that something gets compromised in that process. But so it's not about saving money for me. That's not relevant. I just want to make sure that we try and get what we're trying to achieve. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor Deputy Chair. Thank you. Councillor Leone.
Kia ora, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to start actually by saying that I know we have spent all day debating and discussing this, and I know that we also have some really big, significant issues in our city, like the 240% increase in homelessness. And, you know, these are the types of things that I think we should also be debating in the future. Anyway, I'll get to my point. So today we're making a decision to stand up for Aucklanders as leaders of the city, not just for today, but for future generations of Aucklanders. 4,000 constituents have spoken or have provided the petition today, and we must take action. This has gone on for far too long. Local boards have come back to ask once again, and we can't keep pushing it out. The amendment states urgent in C, but really, is this going to achieve what we need to achieve urgently? These issues have been brought up before, and there was no real outcome. Today, we have had an opportunity to really move this forward, and I do not believe this amendment will get the outcome this city deserves. Why has it taken this long to get these amendments up? We need to push for what our city needs today. We live in the most beautiful city in the world, Auckland Tamaki Makaurau. It is the most beautiful city because as leaders, we make decisions every day to protect our waterways, natural resources, airways and noise levels. Today we must and should send a clear message to Aucklanders that we hear their voices and we will take action. We need to ban private helicopter use in residential Auckland. Waiheke Island already has 50 helicopter pads. Is this acceptable for our city? We have more than enough public helipads across our city. This amendment won't achieve that. Is the issue that it could cost up to $1 million for a plan change, or is it that Minister Bishop may or may not accept this as a plan change? If he doesn't, that's fine, but our role is to stand up for our city and show leadership when it counts. We have nothing to lose by supporting the plan change, but everything to lose by doing nothing, which I believe is this amendment will take longer to get the outcomes that we need. We know this issue is not going to go away. We need to front foot this issue now, otherwise it will cost the council hundreds and thousands of dollars in terms of legal resources in the Environment Court. New York has been bold. Cities in Australia have been bold. Now Auckland needs to be bold. Today, we need to show leadership in terms of the environmental effects of the city. The focus needs to be on the future generations of Auckland, because in 50 years from now, I'm sure they will thank us for it if we take action. But we need to take the best possible action that we can and really put our foot down. Therefore, I will not be supporting the amendment today, and I stand by the original notice of motion by Councillor Mike Lee and seconded by myself. We need strong action today, not 3 more years of unknown outcomes, although I do take on board the work that staff have been doing and will continue to do. But I believe that we really need to put our foot down and take strong action today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Kia ora. Councillor Baker.
I was wondering where I was. Look, I think, the word confusing's been used a lot today. I'm pretty confused after that. We have heard, and I know it's really easy to attack the staff when they're not here to defend themselves, but we have heard today the risks involved in terms of supporting the notice of motion. The notice of motion seems to have been put up as the golden bullet, that it is going to provide the urgent relief that people have spoken to us about. And I don't think anyone here, as Richard has talked about, that anyone here denies. But we've also had, I think, very good amendments put up, because we've been told that if we go down the notice of motion track, that we're going to be there for 4 years potentially. It is going to cost a huge amount of money, and it may not achieve anything. And I say, and I say to the people that we go into the next notice of motion and we talk about the Hauraki Golf District Plan, and I say to the people there, are we willing to risk actually stopping what is going on there now? I say no. I don't think there's too much risk, and I applaud this amendment because I think it is a pragmatic solution. I think it sets us on the right path, and I think we actually need the courage to accept that we are in a difficult situation. The commissioners at wherever it is in Herne Bay have created a problem. They have taken an interpretation of our unitary plan that needs and deserves challenge. But, notice of motion is not the way that we should be addressing issues that we have with our unitary plan. If I was doing that, there's been a decision come out today for something in my ward that I am very opposed to, so I might just do a notice of motion about that. I won't, because it is not the way to address these things. And, prohibition is a very, very strong thing to do. And as we've talked about, there are occasions when it is right to have it. To prohibit it blankly or blanketly across the city, basically, is wrong in my view. And so we need to do something. I believe that this is, firstly, the way it can happen the quickest, which should appease the people who are looking for that relief. It is also the one that comes with the least financial risk to the general ratepayer of Auckland, across Auckland, because it's not something that will be spread across the people who live in the areas affected. It'll be spread across the people in Franklin. I have a helipad next door to me. I live within 1 kilometre of an airfield. I live within 2 kilometres of a commercial helicopter company. I live under the flight path of the Auckland Airport and the Ardmore Airport. I put up with that noise every hour of every day. It's where I live, but that doesn't mean to say that it is right in residential areas, and we need to be able to be very careful, and we will only do that by something like this amendment as opposed to a blunt notice of motion that will not succeed.
Thank you, Councillor. Deputy Mayor.
Look, I think you've done a good job, Chair and Deputy. Sorry, I think you've done a very good job. My problem is with the original notice of motion is potentially we would mislead Aucklanders, because actually, and that's why I support actually a plan change is something the government is saying you can't do. Well, you can, but only within housing and natural hazards, for example. And I think that makes it very clear that that is something that the government is not saying councils can do. The second issue I had is that around the notice of motion was that Aucklanders might think that the decision to support the notice of motion would actually make private helipads in residential areas a prohibitive activity, because it wouldn't. We know there are a whole lot of steps to pass before you get to that point. And let's face it, this is a legal definition of prohibited activity. And you can like helicopters or not like helicopters, but I don't think too many people think they're the same as nuclear power plants. And that is the definition of a prohibited activity. So it's a mountain too high to fly over, in my opinion. So that's, and staff agree. So I do support keeping A and B, but I also support Councillor Fletcher on the urgency of the determination for the Environment Court. We must know where that sits. That is really important, because that, I think, is one of the big cruxes, one of the big issues that we have to face. So I absolutely support C. On D, I think because that mountain was too high on prohibitive, we get into the non-complying. And I think that, that is a mountain we can fly over, non-complying. And so I do support you. I would have been quite happy to be right up to activity status stop. But if you want sensitive areas, I suppose, I still believe in the essence of the clause. And I think if I don't vote for that clause, I'm actually saying that
Sorry, I was supposed to remove, I had asked earlier to remove it would finish at use of prohibited activity. So then the staff would come back with.
Good. All right. And then finally, I believe in E, because I think we need to make the decision. So often we sit around this table and say Wellington shouldn't decide for us. By supporting this amendment, it is our decision. We are not relying on anybody else. And I think that's what everybody in the room is. But most importantly, I wanted to be really clear, Chair, that I didn't want Aucklanders to think that if we voted against the notice of motion, we were saying that private helicopters in residential areas would be prohibitive, because that mountain is too high to fly over. This is a compromise. You've done well. I hadn't seen it till about 3 seconds before you gave it to me, but I think you've landed in a good place, and I'll be supporting it. Thank you.
Kia ora, Deputy Mayor. Thank you. Councillor Walker.
Sure. So I stand by my view that these amendments are confusing, they're muddled, and I question their accuracy. And I commend Councillor Lee for raising the notice of motion, because that is prompting urgency, and it's putting the item on the table, and it's a directive stance, which is absolutely the role of this governing body, to direct. The officers have admitted, and they admitted it under questioning, that prohibited status does have merit, at least in some circumstances, and no doubt many. So why wouldn't you apply that? We all know that non-complying opens the door to multiple challenges, particularly given the money that is behind these applications. And there is immense money to employ any number of experts, a number of whom are hired guns, frankly, to allow things to happen. We know that. That is the reality of the RMA. So frankly, this is an ambush on Councillor Lee. The wording doesn't stack up. We still don't know what the declaration is about. That is not obvious. It mentions experts, and Councillor Lee has already raised issues around the nature of those experts, and it's not experts, it's expert, singular, and certainly not experts in a legal context, which is the context that we're talking about here. It's an acoustical engineer. So frankly, that should have been made obvious so that all of us here know what we're up against. So I see a relatively simple path forward. That's to put the notice of motion of Councillor Lee. Sends a very clear directive. There's a further opportunity in the later motion, particularly item 11, if you want to visit something around non-complying. That option still exists. They are not mutually exclusive. But clearly, if we're strong on this and we want to send a signal, then we would advocate for prohibited status. And absolutely, I would suggest that almost every New Zealander, not just Aucklanders, would be supportive of that, and I would suggest that the government would know that. Otherwise, we could have these things happening everywhere around our coastline, in many locations. And do we want that? The clear answer is no. And what achieves that? A prohibited status. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Ferry.
Kia ora. Sorry. Whew. Right. So the reason I was asking all those questions before, which I know incited a bit of complaint from the mover of the original motion, but I was trying to work my way through this, and I'd note that similar questions from male councillors didn't get shouted at. However, looking at this amendment, like, I can see what we're trying to achieve here, and I think this amendment is on the whole excellent. I think we're actually pretty much all agreed that we don't want helipads in residential areas. What we're struggling with as a group is how best to achieve that outcome successfully. We have advice from staff that says that going straight to prohibited status is highly likely to fail. And I take that very seriously. I also weigh it up alongside the hundreds of emails I've had, the many conversations I've had with people, including on social media, where people genuinely don't want this activity to be even non-complying. They want it to be prohibited. And that's why I was trying to get to the bottom before of how the RMA approaches the public's wishes on an activity. That's why I wanted to understand that better. I think that in balancing those two things, we have an RMA system that actually doesn't really enable us to make decisions either through our vote today or through the way that a plan change would be processed that can give full effect to what we're hearing from our community on this matter. So it's how do we find the best way forward? So I want to be really clear about that. I think the democratic concerns about this process are the result of the way that the RMA was set up. And let's not forget, yes, there is a current attempt to reform it underway, but actually the previous government was trying to reform it too. So it's long acknowledged that actually it's quite an old piece of legislation. Things have changed. It needs reform. It needs change. And perhaps one of the things that needs reform and change in is that imbalance of the democratic input of people about things like activity status and like helipads, which of course, you know, and I think it's 1991 when the RMA was first passed, who would have thought that this would even have been an issue? So there's that issue there about the fact we're dealing with a piece of legislation here, we're dealing with a framework that doesn't allow us to do something that reflects the will of our constituents. That's really hard for all of us. I wanted to note that as soon as the Rawene decision came through, and I think was probably the case for many councillors, I went to the chair of the committee, asked him, what can we do? How can we support an appeal? What's the appropriate way? And staff have come back to us on that, and we'll address that further in item 11. But I do appreciate that it is picked up here. I think having A and B in there, I've had a lot of screenshots shared at me of the March 2024 vote that didn't recognise that there were two separate votes taken, and that the second vote, which included improving the complaints process, which staff have diligently done, to address helicopter noise, was actually passed almost unanimously. It also enabled the Hauraki Gulf Island plan modification that's underway, and it secured funding for that process as well, which was previously unfunded. So actually we did do some stuff in that March 2024 vote, but I've only seen one of the screenshots of one of the votes shared. So I think it's really important that we create something that tells the whole story. All of that said, and I know I'm probably running up against time, I have an issue with D, and it's way too late for me to be suggesting that it be changed further, and I'm not suggesting that. I'm explaining my thinking here. My issue with D is I think we've got it around the wrong way for what the community wants us to do here. I think what we should be looking at is prohibited in general and targeted use of non-complying. And so for that reason, I'm still thinking about D in particular, and I'm thinking about what I'm going to do. So I haven't totally made up my mind yet, and I look forward to the rest of the debate. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Watson.
A little while ago, Councillor Fletcher referred to feeling like it was a bit like Groundhog Day, and I agree with his an awful sense of deja vu. It's 15 months on since we had that last meeting to do with the subject, and if you're looking for people to check out the vote, just go to the minutes and you see basically a repetition of what's happening here today. Councillor Lee and Councillor Leone put up their motion calling on prohibition in in Waiheke, the Great Barrier and residential areas, and a division was called for, and people voted accordingly. Some of the same people here today who are saying that they support Councillor Lee and Councillor Leone, well, they didn't then, and it doesn't sound as if they're doing it again today. So that's really disappointing. Some of the other councillors have referred to this 200-odd word amendment that has manifested itself out of the ether here. But if you look at that 5 clauses, 3 of them are merely noting clauses, some of them with questionable assertions. So they just note stuff. One of them is a request, and that leaves the last one, D. That's the only ones there. And if you look at D there, it's ridden with qualifiers and vagueness, really. Look at the key phrases in that. For staff to commence work on a draft plan change. This is the same staff who previously were talking about no budget, subject to prioritisation and staff availability, and it's a draft. So, that doesn't actually exactly fill me with hope. Go on a little bit further, referring to make it explicitly clear that private helipads and non-emergency helicopter takeoffs and landings in residential zones are non-complying activities in general, with the targeted use of prohibited activity status. I don't know about you, but targeted there has implications of being rather rare and rather focused instead of the other way around. So that amendment goes down to D, and that D is full of holes. What we've heard instead is just a kind of a masterclass in sophistry really here today, where the same people who voted against this in March have really looked at ways that they could undermine this very clear direction from Councillor Lee and Councillor Leone and the community. It comes, 3 3:30 nearly in the afternoon, on the same day as we've had a steady trail of people, a petition of 4,200 people calling for a prohibition. We've had this remarkable case of Rawene Ave where over 1,300 residents in just one area were submitted against that. What more do those people have to do? We heard our poor jet-lagged submitter calling for D-Day for democracy today. Well, what we've seen thus far and what's certainly evident in this amendment is not D-Day for democracy. It's actually D-Day for continuation of this rather sad inertia. I was going to say bureaucratic inertia, but it's political inertia too. 15 months on, and it's ending up just being a rerun of the last meeting. What's quite interesting for me today is some of the other information that's come out in the general. Some people have been talking about context. Well, the wider context is that we have 7 existing heliports in Auckland. I didn't realise there was so many. We have an international city comparison that Councillor Lee put up that shows a whole raft of cities around the world, including our so-called equivalents in Australia, Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane, who have prohibited helipads in residential areas. Yeah, why have they done it, and how on earth were they able to do it and we can't? I mean, that's the obvious question that I'm sure members of the public are talking about. And what does it come at? It comes at a time when there has been a veritable explosion of these helipads in various parts of Auckland. Waiheke Island, 64. 11 on Great Barrier, 4 on Waitemata, and apparently with any number of others in the wing. This calls for a bit of an urgent response. We're certainly not getting that in this amendment at all. Councillor Lee and Councillor Leone signalled the appropriate message to the management, to the planning management, who in turn said that they would act upon the direction of the council. Well, the real vote coming up in a minute is whether the political wing of the governing body are going to give that direction, or are they once again going to defer. We're going to have a repetition of 15th of March 2025, a draft and a request and a noting. So that's the real question here today for those people who have stayed around rather tortuous process to see when it's all said and done whether the people that sit around here are going to back them or they're not. That's the vote in a couple of minutes' time. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Turner.
Thank you. The last speaker said it all. I came here to serve the people, not the process. I remember a quite contentious debate a little while ago where we were facing a judicial review, and I was told by the bureaucrats, by the staff, don't worry about that, we'll just plough on forward and whatever falls out of that we'll handle it at the time. I can't explain this to the people of Auckland, who obviously want helicopter pads banned. We're going to do ourselves a huge reputational harm by going down yet another think tank move that goes on forever and ever. And I've listened to everybody here. We all know that if we don't do something decisive today, we'll be back and back and back, and then I'll retire and someone else will come in and they'll keep coming back. People want us to do something. Let's do something.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Henderson.
Well, thank you, Chair. Look, for people engaging in these kind of debates for the first time at home, you get an appreciation of how neutered local government really is in this country. That for too often we're talking about planning discussions here and we're operating under an RMA. We have central government legislation that concentrates most power in the hands of central government, not us. We're supposed to be planning our city, and yet we don't get to do a lot of the things that other cities can do. You've got the Environment Court, so we can kick off and we can gnash our teeth about, oh, we've got to protect our elite soils and we've got to do all these good things. Just run to the Environment Court, pay a very expensive lawyer and get the decision you want. And that's what happens in this country. That's what happens in this city. So people talking about, well, what about Sydney? What about Brisbane, etc.? Well, they're operating under completely different jurisdictions to Auckland. And actually, I think it's high time that we give communities more power. And I think that all of the present presenters here would agree with that sentiment. We want to act as much as we can. We've got to be very clever about how we do it. We all agree, and every speaker has said it, we all agree on the outcomes that we want here. We all agree on that. We want to know what is most likely to succeed in getting those goals across the line. That's what the submitters want. They want us to succeed. That's what the local boards want. They want us to succeed. That's what the original mover of the NOM wants, for us to succeed, and this is how you succeed. It's a big resolution. I don't know how the reporters here are going to put it down into one headline, but this is how you succeed. Good luck, team. I want to say, look, there's been talk of leadership in this debate. And I want to just, I don't know if it's appropriate, but I want to support the chair in that because you have shown leadership here. Leadership to me is working hard behind the scenes, doing the tough, unsexy policy stuff, wading through the documents, having all the discussions that you can to try and get something across the line that will actually work. And that is what the chair has done. I want to acknowledge you for that. We all want to restrict private helipad use as much as we can, take all the negative effects as read, because there was arguments very well made from everybody here. I just want to add, and you might expect this from me, but in the mainland of Auckland, allowing helipads has a potential effect of restricting housing development as well, in the best places for it, through reverse sensitivity. And that's not acceptable to me. This is why I want it to succeed. In terms of housing, we know that for far too long, the planning of the city has been beholden to the interests of the wealthy and the sorted. We need to change that. I would encourage council to solve this problem and any others that restrict housing supply in the best places of Auckland for housing. We want this helipad use to be restricted cheaply, effectively and quickly, and in my opinion, this is our best shot, so I'm going to vote for it. Thanks, Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you. Councillor Bartley.
Thank you, Chair. First, I want to acknowledge Councillor Lee for his advocacy for his ward, and also respect to the emails and to the people who have presented in public forum. I can understand the frustration that they are going through and just wanting to enjoy the peace and quiet of their garden and their home. I get that. But we've heard from officers today that really it's an unrealistic option going with the NOM because it's a high bar to meet for prohibited activity and quite a bit of money to spend on a gamble which we've already been told by officers is going to lose or has a high chance of losing. So I do support this. I think we want the same thing. Everybody wants the same thing, but it's how we get there. And I think what you've got up there seeks to achieve what the NOM was trying to achieve. I didn't support the NOM because I don't support giving people false hope. And I want to support what the public are asking for. And I don't think it was going to be achieved through that NOM, but I can see it has some legs under this. So people will probably be mad at us for supporting this, thinking that we support rich people to have helipads in residential areas, but that is not the case. We're trying to support something that gets the outcome that they're wanting to see. And it is now 3:30, and this is what the governing body of this city is spending its time on. Not saying that it's not important, I'm just saying this is what we're spending almost a whole day debating, and we already know the issues facing our city, and this is what we're doing.
Kia ora, Councillor. I'm hearing a lot of concern about the word draft. No matter what decision was passed today, a draft has to be formed and brought back to us to approve. So if it was the NOM or this, that's literally how this works. Councillor Foley.
Kia ora. Thanks, Chair, and I appreciate how long we've spent on this item. I'll try to make it brief. If I'm honest, at the start of this whole issue, way back when, I didn't give this issue that much weight because I sort of saw it as a first world problem. And I know that many of the constituents in the area I serve certainly did view it as a first world problem. And unlike one of the presenters who said that they don't live at the end of the Auckland airport, I do. And our constituents do. We live in the Manukau ward, we live under the flight path. Most nights we have the police helicopters overhead doing their job, and we don't have a choice about it. Like Councillor Baker said, we live with that noise all the time. However, I know that if my community did have a choice, they probably would choose peace and quiet enjoyment of their backyard. And I have to say that I have been very open-minded and listening to all of the presenters, and especially to the local board and the local board chairs who spoke with so much passion today. And I heard the deep frustration and the desperateness in the voices of many of the presenters. And I get the sense that they have been screaming into the wind for a very long time about this issue. And they've come to us as their leaders, as their elected leaders, as perhaps their last line of defense in this issue. So for that reason, I was going to support the local boards and the chairs and the presenters and going to support the notice of motion. However, I commend you, Chair, for this amendment. I do think it's a good amendment. I am still open-minded like Councillor Ferry and still thinking about it and considering the debate, and haven't quite made my mind up yet, but I appreciate your attempts and the Deputy Chair to find a way forward. And as Councillor Bartley said, we all want to achieve the same thing. Like I said, I do live under the flight path and we have helicopters as it is, but my area is being gentrified, exponentially. And there is a possibility that coming very soon we'll see helipads and private helicopters in my area. And having that noise on top of the noise we are already suffering without choice to change, I think would be an issue going forward for my community. So I'm thinking very carefully about it. I appreciate the amendment, Chair, and I do think you've done your best to try to find a way forward. I still have some issues with D, and I'm considering that. But yes, I'm just wanted to say that I support the local board, the chairs, and the residents as well in this work. And thank you to Councillor Lee and Councillor Leone for trying their best as well to find a way to do the thing that our residents have asked us to do. Kia ora. Thanks, Chair.
Kia ora, Councillor. Thank you very much. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'd also like to acknowledge the communities that have come here today and asked for us to address this issue. I personally want to close down this misguided notion that it's okay to put a helipad in residential area, but not just in a residential area, many other sensitive areas across Auckland. I have been, almost 12 years ago now, and one of the officers referred to this case, challenged my neighbour who wanted to put in a helipad, and we did that successfully in a residential area. Long time back, but boy, the number that have been lining up since then just astounds me. Now, I can understand that some people find it easier to bundle their polo sticks and golf clubs, into a helicopter and not the car, let alone maybe the car and off to the local commercial heliport, be it at Rosedale or Mechanics Bay. I can understand that because at the moment there is a pathway for them to put in a helipad and not take that short journey to Mechanics or Rosedale or whatever other commercial heliport is in their proximity. The way the rule book is written at the moment provides that pathway. It provides that pathway. And I don't think that is right at all. The status quo has just got to change. Now, it's about how we undertake that change. That notion that you can fly and land a helicopter in residential areas and those other sensitive areas of Auckland, it's got to be addressed. And I am emphasising that there's more than just residential areas. And now this D picks that up. That's why the D is important. If you think about significant ecological areas, that's covered now. If you think about areas of cultural importance for Māori, Waihi Tapu, overflying, say, a Waihi Tapu to land at a helipad, that gets picked up. There's a whole lot that then gets picked up. So on the face of it, the discussion today, and I totally understand this, there's an assumption that if you go to prohibited, you're really closing it down. You're doing your job, you know. But the truth is, it's not that straightforward, as we've heard today in the evidence. Now, we could march on regardless and just be waving that flag and pumping those hooters and making the noise and prohibition we got, and then 2 years down the track, we fall at our faces. But we'll have all forgotten. There'll be other people maybe, but we will have all forgotten the process that we went through here today. So we are likely to hit our faces on this one if we charge ahead blindly. Now, I'm not one to be pedantic on this, but I want to achieve the outcome. I want to close this opportunity down. So we have the opportunity to seek a determination from the Environment Court for an immediate issue. That's really important. We've also discovered that we don't have the prescribed non-complying activity status in the plan currently. It's not prescribed, it's not sitting there bound up with really strong, robust, impenetrable objectives and policies. It's not there. Now, I don't know whether people actually heard that from our staff today, that we currently don't have that. That is not the status quo. The status quo is significantly weaker than that. Now, what you're suggesting here, and I appreciate the changes in the favour of many of the people that have made approaches to you two, Chair, to make sure that we cover things off, is we are starting to, in this D, we are starting to address this status quo situation where the rules are riddled with holes and people are driving buses and helicopters through them. The non-complying status with very precise objectives and policies that can have the effect of prohibition almost. Can't say it absolutely, but it closes in on prohibition. That, in my view, is the way to go. So one of the things that the notice of motion is limited to, and I totally respect Councillor Lee's advocacy here, but one of the things that it's very human-centric. I actually think this needs to go a lot wider, and it does need to take into to account more effects, the ecological, the cultural that I've already mentioned. So I'm supporting this today, the amendment, but boy, I want us to put our foot down on this and close this opportunity down, because this notion of a helipad in my residential neighbourhood or yours and the other areas of Auckland is a madcapped idea.
Kia ora, Councillor Darby, thank you. And last speaker, Councillor Williamson.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I want to congratulate Mike Lee for having put the nom through and fully sympathise with the sentiments of what he has been trying to achieve with it. I don't think there's many that don't. But I've got a mathematics background, and I always like to take a matrix and sort of have an end point and a start point, and then have what are the various routes that can get you there, and then put all the components on each of those routes. What's the cost to us? What's the cost to a third party? What's the cost to the litigant? What's the delay chops? What's the unexpected consequences? And put each one of those on each one of the routes to say which is the best way to achieve that same outcome. Now, I think what we're trying to achieve, the outcome, is what Councillor Lee's notice of motion did. But I've become more and more convinced today that that may actually be a longer route, more expensive, with quite a few potholes and unintended consequence hiccups. Might be wrong, because I think if there was a third column we could vote in called bewildered, I'd be putting my tick in bewildered. And I suggest to you something to the staff. Something this complex, with this many strands to it, really should have been workshopped. Because I go to some workshops in which I hear everything I already bloody knew, and I think, why did I waste 2 hours just sitting here listening to stuff I'd already read and understand? I don't understand this well enough. I understand that everyone is making comments about, well, you'll have this unintended consequence and it will cost you that, there'll be another 2 years delay there. And I don't know if I believe that or not. And of all of the various strands that get me from A through to B where I want to end up, where I think we all want to end up, I still do not know I still don't even know whether we could pass the NOM and then do 11, and the NOM will do no damage to doing 11, because I thought that would be the best outcome. Vote for the NOM, get that underway and do 11. But I'm now convinced that it will cloud things enough that it could actually add delay to what we're trying to achieve. I'm pleased with the amendment, disappointed that we get it that late in the day when everyone should have had this in advance to think about where it was going. Very disappointed that we couldn't have kicked this around in a 5 or a 6 hour workshop, because we really needed something big to chew all of those details, because I bet you if I had to sit an exam on the details of some of the potholes and unintended consequences that could arise, I'd get a D-, because I've heard stuff today that I didn't think was true. I've looked it up and now I think it is possibly correct. So in the end, I just say I'm going to support what's been put up here, because I'm hopeful it'll achieve what Councillor Lee has been trying to do, but it'll do it quicker without less of the possible road pitfalls and potholes along the way.
Thank you very much, Councillor. The last speaker, Councillor Fletcher. Thank you.
I just find this really disappointing today, because the process has not been one that gives me confidence. I've already referred to the fact that I feel we had this debate a couple of years ago, and here we are having another go at it. And I still am perplexed at some of the wording, you know, that's been referred to by others. We request staff to commence work on a draft plan. There's not that sense of urgency within this. And I've got a lot of sympathy with Councillor Lee. He's been courageous in coming out to try and represent what I believe is the view of the majority of the public. So this committee has further fueled today the increasing distrust that I'm feeling about the advice that I get. You know, right now we've got lots of things happening on Plan Change 78, intensification, RMA reform, and none of us are having the briefings directly. We're trusting that the officers of this, along with the mayor, they're going in to fix it for us. But, you know, if we can't trust that the views of the councillors and those members of the Hakura IMSB are being properly represented, and that we are prioritising things, because in so much of what we do with this huge Auckland beast that we're trying to direct, there's just so much that we're trying to change that so often things fall off the radar. And that's, I can't help but feel this fell off the radar. And now it's come back to us today. I'm told that it would have come as an agenda item with or without Mike Lee's nom. But I don't know that I actually really believe that. And so I'm really between a rock and a hard place. I would like to support Councillor Lee, and I think if the process had had integrity, I should be able to support C and Mike Lee's amendment. But I'm not being given that option because of a cheeky little substitution by way of an amendment. I don't think that does justice to all of the energy that has been put into this notice of motion, and I really want to support the notice of motion, but I would like staff to get that urgent determination from the Environment Court. So I'm going to ask you, Chair, how can I support C, and also are you going to take each of A, B, C, D and E separately, or are you going to take it as one? Again, I'm with Councillor Williamson. When I think of how many cursed workshops we have for hours and hours at the end, not that we ever get to participate, we just listen like some 101 lecture to somebody droning on and on. But this could have been a really good opportunity for us to actually come together and show some leadership together. Instead of that, once again, we're all polarised, we distrust one another, and yet we owe it to the public of Auckland that we are going to bring some urgency to prohibiting this activity. And so I'm going to ask for your guidance on this. How are you intending to take the vote on this, Chair, seeing as you've gazumped poor Councillor Lee?
Yeah, we'll take it as one and people can note their opposition or to any of the parts at the end. I think it's probably the easiest.
Well, all I can do is just register a protest that the process has been less than helpful, and I think we've shortchanged the public of Auckland yet again, and we are certainly not fixing Auckland at the rate we're going.
Mr. Chair, you just said that you're going to take it as one and we can note out, but those notes are pointless, aren't they? Because if you say
Well, we can, if there's an issue afterwards, we can look that up. But do we wanting to take this as a? We wanting to take this as a.
Would you take out the word draft because it's a weasel word? It doesn't mean a draft plan change is not a plan change.
I'm happy to take out the word draft to clarify for the public whether it was any plan change that got approved, whether it's through notice of motion or this comes back. Gets prepared as a draft because you can only approve something in draft to become final. But I'm happy to remove draft. Right, so we're wanting to approve this. All those in favour? Oh, okay.
Thank you, members. You're voting on the amendment which has been on your screen and circulated. Councillor Hills.
Yes.
Member Ashby.
Aye.
Councillor Baker.
Aye.
Councillor Bartley.
Yes.
Deputy Chair Dalton.
Yes.
Councillor Darby.
4.
Councillor Ferry.
4, but noting on D.
Against D. Thank you. Councillor Filipina.
Yes, and I put my hand up for comment, but that's okay now. We're in the vote, so apologies, and
Apologies, Councillor Filipina. I didn't see the pop-up on the screen.
Councillor Fletcher.
No, but noting my support for C.
Councillor Furley.
Yes.
Member Hanare.
Yeah.
Councillor Henderson.
Yes.
Councillor Lee.
No.
Councillor Leone.
No.
Councillor Newman.
Yes, but I wish to register my vote against A and against B.
Thank you. Councillor Sayers.
No.
Deputy Mayor Simpson. Councillor Stewart.
4.
Councillor Turner.
no,
Councillor Walker.
No.
Councillor Watson.
No.
Councillor Williamson.
Yes.
Thank you. That is carried. 15 to 7. Now back to you for the substantive motion.
Well, thank you. So that becomes the substantive, so we will need to vote on it again. Did we want to go through a division again or just vote on the full? All those in favour?
Aye.
Any opposed?
No. 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 A travesty. It's a stitch-up.
Thank you. We're just going to remove an extension of time. Councillor Dalton and Councillor Darby.
Sorry, can I just
sorry.
The word draft.
No, do you want your vote against?
Yes, please.
Can we just go through again, please, who
Oh,
that was?
so for the substantive votes, who would like their names recorded against? Councillor Walker, Councillor Watson, Councillor Turner, Councillor Leone,
Councillor Sayers.
Councillor Sayers,
Yeah.
Councillor Lee.
Thank you.
Right, so we'll move an extension of time. It was Councillor Dalton, Councillor Darby. All those in favour? Aye. Any opposed?
Yes.
We won't take those. Right, we'll take a 5-minute break.
Sorry, Mike.
What about the one?